So you might, for people who do not know who our grandfather was, Major General William H. Rupertus, I can give you a little bit of background if I should jump ahead in that. He served in the Marine Corps from 1913 to 1945. As Don said, he was the longest serving commanding general of the 1st Marine Division in the Pacific. Again, but he died in 1945, so his story has never been told until now. He is born in Washington, D.C. to a German-American family in the German-American community that was very active in the early part of the 1900s, late 1850s to early part of 1900s. And his parents were shop owners, and they were very involved with the German orphanage that was there and German church. And actually, a lot of the Rupertus family is buried in a section of Washington called Prospect Cemetery, Prospect Hill. And it's neat to go there and see those old graves. Our grandfather is buried at Arlington Cemetery, along with a lot of my family. So, but he is probably known for writing the Rifleman's Creed that Marines, he wrote that right after the Japanese bombed us at Pearl Harbor. And as an expert rifleman, he felt that the Marines, young Marines flooding the system, really needed to slow down and get to know their rifles better, because he knew the enemy, which we'll get into. He knew the Japanese enemy, and he also knew that these Marines were going to go to the Pacific, where, we know about the Pacific, it was pretty rough conditions.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know I now have a Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Over there you can find exclusive Patreon episodes and podcasts based on suggestions from patrons, and other benefits like early access to all of my content, live hangouts, your name in the end credits, and much, much more. So please go check it out.
So he wrote the Rifleman's Creed. He was the commanding assistant division commander, and then the commanding officer, division commander of the 1st Marine Division from Tulagi, well, really New River, North Carolina, when the 1st Marine Division really formed, and then through Tulagi, Cape Gloucester, and Peleliu. You got Tulagi, Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, and Peleliu. It'd be interesting to people who love the Pacific War history. He served in China and Peking in the late 1920s, and he went back to Shanghai in 1937, and he was there during the bombing of Shanghai when the Japanese attacked Shanghai. He was part of the 4th Marine Division, also known as the China Marines, protecting the American sector of the international settlements. And then finally, he was the namesake of USS Rupertus, which served our country from 1945 to 1973. It's a destroyer, and it was in some great battles. And we sold that ship to Greece, and they used the ship until about 1994. So his son is my father. His first family died in Peking of a scarlet fever epidemic. And his wife and 2 children all died. He was quarantined. When he eventually came back, a couple years later, he met my grandmother, Sleepy, who was much younger, and they had my dad in 1939. And our dad went on to he graduated from the Naval Academy in 1962 and then became a Marine officer. So growing up back to Washington, he was a cadet at the McKinley Technical School. So that was high school. And then he joined the DC National Guard, worked in the Naval Gunnery. After he served there, he joined as an enlisted man and immediately got promoted to an officer, not immediately, but pretty soon after. And then he joined the U.S. Revenue Cutters Service Academy, which is the predecessor to the Coast Guard Academy. Mm-hmm. And he served there for 3 years, traveled the world on his summer tours, and basically graduated second in his class of 14. But on a medical, we discovered this. We didn't know this previously until this research journey, but he got a diagnosis of Bright's disease. So he's in his early 20s, and he was told the naval or the revenue cutters doctor said, "You're going to die in 5 years. We can't take you on." And, it just was devastating. And so he resigned. And then a few weeks later, he joined the Marine Corps. He signed up to be an officer in the Marine Corps. I guess he decided he just would give his life to the country. And he served the Marine Corps for 35 years and, obviously didn't die in 5 years. So the Marine Corps, he served on the Rifleman's team. They immediately picked a couple officers up to compete on the Rifleman's team from about 1913 to 1915. So that you can see he's developing. He worked as naval gunnery. He's working at the Rifleman or on the rifle team. He's becoming this expert rifleman. Then he gets pulled away to go on the USS Florida, which was going to help our allies in Europe. And he spent some time on the USS Florida. So moving forward, he was on the USS Florida, and then they asked him to go to Haiti. Germans were in Haiti. I don't know if people know that, but they were, and that's pretty close to the US. So there was that threat of not only instability of the Haitian government, but the threat of the Germans being a little too close. And so he was there to help, he helped establish the Garde de Haiti. And also he was chief of the police there. And that was accompanied, so his wife and children were there. His first wife and children were in Haiti as well. So we've got letters from the Haitian president at the time, like hand-signed, and lots of photos from them too. So next up, he has a few other duties back in the States, and then gets his first Far East assignment to go to Peking, China, to again guard the Peking legation, the American sector of the Peking legation. And it was a fairly calm time during 1929 to 1931 when he was there. And he spent some time with Roy Chapman Andrews. I don't know if you're familiar with that name. He was an explorer of the Gobi Desert. And and he helped the Marines out. They, as a result of him being an explorer, they would leave gas all around China and the Gobi Desert. And so could map China pretty well. And so he and another officer, Pete Hill, did a lot of exploration. So Bill was friends with them, or my grandfather, General Rupertus, was friends with them, and did all sorts of exploring during this semi-calm time. But unfortunately, just months after they arrived, in 1929, his daughter, right before Christmas, his little daughter, Anne Rodney, was diagnosed with scarlet fever, and she died within 2 days. And then they came around to February, my grandfather was quarantined, and his wife, Marguerite, who was 38, and his son, Will Jr., who was 14, got scarlet fever, and they died within 24 hours of each other in February 1930. So, I could only imagine how he felt losing his family, and it was really hard for me to get through these chapters writing. But I found an interview of someone who was a surgeon during that time, and he talked about Rupertus and how he responded, and he was just devastated. And people didn't see him for about 2 weeks, and then he knew he's coming out of quarantine. He didn't, for whatever reason, scarlet fever didn't take him down, but it took his family down. His family was shipped back to Washington. They're buried at Arlington Cemetery. There are two, you have his grave, and then there are two little graves for his children. Anyway, he stayed on, and he couldn't leave. They didn't have an officer to replace him at the time. The Marine Corps was pretty small back then. And I'm not sure, looking at now with COVID and everything, I'm not sure he could leave because they didn't want to transmit, but supposedly he lived right next to Holcomb at the time. And so Holcomb, who went on to be Commandant, General Holcomb, got to see how my grandfather, rallied. And I don't know what it would be like to go through losing your whole family, but somehow he managed to power on, and that's kind of the description of his whole life. He just somehow, powered on. So anyway, so he came back from Peking, and he again worked a desk duty for a little bit, and then the person on his way back from China, he had met Joe Hill on a naval hospital ship that took him back to the United States. And Joe Hill had a niece named Sleepy Hill, who thought Bill Rupertus, Major Rupertus, would be a good match for. So long story short, Sleepy and Bill got married in 1933 on the day that Roosevelt was inaugurated. Right after he came back, the Japanese bombed Taipei, the suburb of Shanghai, and killed, I guess, over 1,000 people. And to me, that's kind of the beginning of the beginning. He wasn't there during that time, but surely he heard about it. And by 1938, he was back in China. The Marine Corps sent him back to China because of the experience he had, I guess, in China before. And he brought Sleepy, which is kind of crazy after losing his first family in China. He brought his new wife. Well, they've been married for a while now, but, and from the pictures, it looks like they had quite a nice time with international settlement. Shanghai was very, a great place to be, very international, lots of people to meet. So they went out and had fun at the French Club and all the old places where people used to enjoy going out and having dinners and dancing. But then on August 17th, 1937, the Japanese bombed Shanghai, and everything changed overnight. Our grandfather, the Marines went on alert. Admiral Yarnell, Henry Yarnell, who was the naval officer in command there, sent out a notice that all wives and Marines that could leave needed to leave, evacuate immediately. And so my grandmother went to the Philippines, where her sister was with her Navy husband, and she was there while the Marines stayed behind. My grandfather in the Marines, he was CO of the 4th Marine Division then. And so they were protecting this 3.5-mile sector, the American sector of the international settlement. And it was very, very tense because they could see the Japanese, as the Marines were guarding the sector, they could see the Japanese doing what they were doing to the Chinese and the violence that was happening, but they couldn't do anything. They were told to hold fire. Yeah, so to clarify, in case the audience isn't aware, these international settlements were kind of like island enclaves where European businesses and Americans and Japanese did business with the Chinese, and every country brought in their different guards to guard the sector of that they managed. And so, yeah, our grandfather and the Marines witnessed some brutal, awful battles in Usocho Creek, people trying to escape and just being shot, and people being bayoneted, pregnant women being bayoneted. I just don't want to go. It was so evil. But I heard, I can't verify this, there's a China Marine friend of mine, Dirk Haig, who's an expert. He runs the China Marine website. He said that it was so stressful for some Marines that they committed suicide because they couldn't respond and they would get shrapnel hit at them. They witnessed brutality they'd never seen before. Officers, Marine officers, Colonel Price wrote home to Marine headquarters that he'd never witnessed anything as bad or read about anything as bad. It was worse than the Huns, he said. If we don't take care of them here, they're going to come to our shores. Admiral Yarnell wrote this whole, about a 4-page letter back to the headquarters in the United States and just said, we are facing something that is not going to stand down and we need to be prepared. So this is 1937. And, the Japanese do come near our shores, at least in America, or Pearl Harbor in 1941. But this was already happening. And so it was a pretty intense time. Sleepy finally, and the woman finally came back, I think around December. The records are really spotty from when they came, but I have pictures of them walking around with a Japanese general, seeing the devastation of Shanghai. So, it's really something in history that, as I was researching this, I was so surprised that so few people knew about, whether it's the bombing of Shanghai or the rape of Nanking. It just was startling to me. And even some Marines I talked to didn't know about it. And I think it's fascinating history. It's sad history, but it's pretty fascinating. Next thing you know, after they come back from China, from Shanghai, they finally come back in 1938. They have my dad in 1939. He's CO of the Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C. And then he goes out to San Diego, and he's in San Diego when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And he immediately gets promoted to the CO of that base. Colonel Ahurst gets promoted, who was his boss. That is when our grandfather wrote the Marine Corps, or my rifle, the creed of a United States Marine. Thousands of men were flooding the system to go fight the Japanese in the Pacific, and gearing up for war. And like I said earlier, our grandfather knew this enemy pretty closely. He had seen what they were capable of. And he knew these young Marines, I guess they were 17, 18, probably some were 16, were rip-roaring and ready to go, but they needed to kind of slow down, pick up that rifle, and get to know it a little better, because he knew that it would not only save them, but also save their brother, or that they were fighting next to in the Pacific. When you're boots on the ground, you've got, your knife, you've probably got a grenade, you've got a rifle, and so he wrote this Rifleman's Creed, and I'd love to read it. Here it goes. My rifle, the Creed of a United States Marine by General William H. Rupertus. This was first published in the March 14th, 1942 in the Marine Corps San Diego Chevron. And it reads like this. This is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one is mine. My rifle is my best friend. It is my life. I must master it as I must master my life. Without me, my rifle is useless. Without my rifle, I am useless. I must fire my rifle true. I must shoot straighter than my enemy who is trying to kill me. I must shoot him before he shoots me. I will. My rifle and I know that what counts in war is not the rounds we fire, the noise of our burst, nor the smoke we make. We know that it is the hits that count. We will hit. My rifle is human, even as I am human, because it is my life. Thus, I will learn it as a brother. I will learn its weaknesses, its strengths, its parts, its accessories, its sights, and its barrel. I will keep my rifle clean and ready, even as I am clean and ready. We will become part of each other. We will. Before God, I swear this creed. My rifle and I are the defenders of my country. We are the masters of our enemy. We are the saviors of my life. So be it, until victory is America's, and there is no enemy but peace. Marines recited that for years at boot camp. It's been in some movies, probably most notably
Full Metal Jacket, of course.
Yeah, that scene is pretty.
Everyone knows it from there.
Yeah, pretty. Yeah. But it's pretty powerful, and he really wanted it to be not something that he preached, but something that Marines felt so deeply that it just became part of them. So after that, he leaves San Diego and joins General Vandergrift in New River, North Carolina in March 1942. And they gear up. They're gearing these Marines to get ready to go to the Pacific. Vandergrift's echelon, they split forces because the transportation was so tough. We were battling two fronts, Europe and the Pacific. So General Vandergrift took, the division commander, took his echelon from New River to Norfolk. They left, went around the Panama Canal, stopped off in Panama to pick up some booze for the Marines. and went on their way. Meanwhile, our grandfather went across the country in the Marines via train to San Francisco, and they shipped out from there. So his echelon. And then they all arrived in New Zealand. And basically, they were told that they would be going to battle within 6 months. You know, once they got to New Zealand, they'd have 6 months to train, get comfortable in the Pacific. And well, the truth is, the Joint Chiefs said, "Oh no, we just found out the Japanese are building a base on Guadalcanal, and we need you to get there in August." So my grandfather's his echelon arrived in July, and within days he had to turn around, and some of the Marines didn't even get off the ship, his Marines, and they had to go to the operations area where they were going to begin training outside of Fiji.
I want to talk a little bit about the situation, the military situation, though, in the spring of 1942. Of course, everybody knows, I mean, there's a lot of debate as to when World War II started. It depends on your perspective. In some ways, it may have started in the Pacific with the invasion of Manchuria. The Japanese, it just depends on what historian you talk to. The Japanese have been very aggressive in China. Rupertus saw that. We were bombed at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, and the Japanese literally went on a rampage around the Pacific. You know, they went to Singapore, you know, they into the Philippines. You name it, the Japanese were basically putting a stronghold on the Western Pacific, really without opposition. And they pretty much had their way after December 7th. And the United States and the Allies were trying to rebuild and trying to get ourselves in position to challenge them. But really, until a couple of naval victories, first we had a kind of a draw at Coral Sea. Then there was a great naval victory at Midway in June of 1942, under which, you know, we took out 6 of their carriers in that miraculous operation, which was a major blow to the Japanese Navy, but not a lethal blow, as we'll see in a moment. Things have been pretty slim. But a bigger problem was, you know, General Wainwright had surrendered some 70,000 troops, including Filipinos and some 20,000 American troops in the Philippines, the largest, you know, defeat in the history of the United States military. And so the Japanese had their way on the ground. And while the Navy had pushed back with those 2 marvelous, operations, first at Guadalcanal and then even more so at Midway, we were reeling, and we needed a victory on the ground. There's a place called the Solomon Islands. You know, Guadalcanal is, about 2,300 miles from Darwin, about 1,500 miles across the water or so from Brisbane, depending on where you're going in Australia. But the Japanese were using the Solomon Islands, hopefully for them, as kind of a staging base to move eventually into Australia. And at this place called Guadalcanal, they were building an airstrip, and we couldn't let them do that. So in August of 1942, August 6th and August 7th of 1942, the U.S. Naval Task Force with 70-some ships is carrying the 1st Marine Division approaching on a northerly course from New Zealand. Amy mentioned that. And there are going to be 2 task forces who are going to be hitting the Solomon Islands, hopefully by surprise through the dark. I'm going to talk a little bit about Guadalcanal because everybody's heard of Guadalcanal, but I'm going to talk about another place right across something called the Iron Bottom Channel, or it used to be called a Sea Lark Channel, from Guadalcanal, a little place called Tulagi. Guadalcanal Island, for those of your viewers who can't see, is a big island which sort of has the shape of the state of California. If you turn it sideways, it almost looks like California. And across this Sea Lark Channel from Guadalcanal, 20-some miles, there's Florida Island, which looks a little bit like the British Isles. You know, not exactly, but both turn on their side. Just off of Florida Island, there's a small island called Tulagi. And Tulagi Island was the capital, the British capital of what was in the British Solomon Islands. And the Japanese had come in and run the British off several months before, and had taken control of Tulagi. And Tulagi, in a small island off of Tulagi, Gavatu, is where the Japanese had their seaplanes, where their air power was located for controlling that section of the Solomon Islands at the time. In the meantime, they were building a large airstrip on Guadalcanal. But what had to happen before, we could actually move into Guadalcanal and try to secure that? We had to secure and take and defeat the Japanese forces on Tulagi. Okay, if any of your viewers or listeners have have seen the HBO series The Pacific, if you've seen that, you know what happens at Guadalcanal initially is a fairly accurate representation, because our Marines went into Guadalcanal largely initially the first few days without much opposition. The Japanese began to counterattack, but Tulagi had to be taken before we could even do that. And so General Rupertus, working with General Vandegrift, Rupertus was given the responsibility of taking his Marines and their task force into Tulagi to attack it, to defeat it, and to secure it before we could even move on to Guadalcanal, because the last thing we needed was the Japanese to be able to hit us by the air with their seaplanes located on Guadalcanal and Gavitu. You're seeing here basically the direction of the naval task forces that came in. And the task force broke just southwest of an island called Savo, in which one task force, which brought General Vandegrift's group in, sailed basically to the south, waiting to come on to Guadalcanal. The other task force, commanded by General Rupertus, moved in position to attack Tulagi, which those operations began on August 7, 1942. On the morning of August 7, 1942, again, we haven't gone into Guadalcanal yet until we first hit Tulagi. Rupertus is assigned the responsibility of hitting Tulagi and hitting Gavitu as well. He's given air power initially from 3 U.S. carriers, the Wasp, the Saratoga, and the Enterprise, who are positioned south of Guadalcanal and flying their missions over the top of Guadalcanal. Remember, Guadalcanal was not yet as organized a Japanese stronghold to hit Florida Island, to hit Tulagi Island, and to hit various other points in order to give us a little bit of a beachhead going in. What we're seeing now is a little bit of a closer look on the general area there between Guadalcanal and Tulagi. You can see the Sea Lark Channel. It's 20 some miles apart. Task Force Yoke was a task force, the Marine Task Force, and that part of the division, 2,500 or so Marines under the command of General Rupertus. In the meantime, General Vandegrift took his ships to wait off the coast of Guadalcanal for the operations against Tulagi. A little closer view here of Tulagi and the islets off of it, Gavitu and Tanambogo. They were connected by a little land bridge, literally several hundred yards off the southeastern coast of Tulagi. And if you look at Tulagi, the Japanese were concentrated in the southeastern portion of that island. That'll become significant in a second, because Rupertus pulled a very daring maneuver in attacking Tulagi on that morning, because we wanted to hit them by surprise if at all possible. What we're seeing here is a map of Tulagi Island. And if you'll notice in the far right-hand corner, the southeast quarter, most of the Japanese forces are there. Rupertus' daring maneuver here is that he sent his men into Beach Blue up along to the northwest of where the Japanese were located. It was a daring and unexpected amphibious invasion. By the way, this is our first amphibious invasion of the war. And so Rupertus, at least in the Pacific, so Rupertus goes in, and the reason it's daring is because that whole area off Beach Blue is full of coral reef. So you cannot even get landing craft initially up onto the beach because of the coral reef. So you have to stop several hundred yards, jump out of the landing craft, and then wade in. The Japanese are not expecting the attack here. They think an attack is coming, but they have fortified in the southeastern part. So the Rangers under Colonel Edson, under the general's command, hit into this area off Beach Blue and then begin moving down to the southeast quadrant of the island and coming in to hit the Japanese from behind and surprise them. They were able to pull that maneuver off. We're seeing some photographs, actual photographs now of U.S. Marine raiders coming on board on the morning of August 7th, 1942, there at Beach Blue on Tulagi. This is approximately almost 3 years to the date from Hiroshima and from the atomic attacks in Japan. So just to give us an idea where we were. But again, we got to have a victory on the ground here. What we're seeing here are photographs taken from a U.S. Navy plane showing the direction under which Edison's raiders are moving to the south east to attack the Japanese enclave. They got to cross this big ravine, and they do essentially come in from that behind and surprise the Japanese and hit them there. We're seeing here another map of the positioning between Tulagi, which was the first ground invasion that was launched by the 1st Marines, and the islands of Tanambogo and Gavatu, especially where we have seaplanes as well. We see that it's at 08 in the morning when the raiders hit Tulagi initially and begin to move their forces to the southeast. And then the 1st Marine Paratroop Battalion, which was activated at the time, hits Gavatu at about noon. And they both run into very, very fierce resistance. So again, unlike what we saw accurately in the Pacific series, when Vandegrift's Marines go initially onto Guadalcanal without resistance, Rupertus's Marines here are going into the teeth of resistance. We're showing some photographs again from U.S. Navy photographs of the cricket grounds burning. As our Marines are moving again to the southeast, trying to put a stranglehold on the Japanese forces there. It's a photograph of Tulagi Island. We're showing now a map of Gavatu and Tanambogo. These were considered islets. They rise up out of the Pacific and they're connected by this dam or this land bridge, as you can see. And so at about noon, the 1st Paratroop Battalion hits there, again under heavy fire. This battle on Gavatu will go on from the 7th into the 9th before we finally get it secure. Photographs here of Gavatu and Tanambogo burning as we have to rout the Japanese out there. What we're seeing now is a kind of a map of where the troop ships were located. The Neville was the flagship that General Rupertus was on, and we see several other ships here, the President Jackson, the Hayward, and others. And so they would run in to Beach Blue from these positions off the shore, bringing our Marines in as they would hit the ground. Here's another map of Tulagi and Gavatu, so you can sort of see them together, and again showing the 1st Marines coming in, the 1st Raider Regiment coming in at 8 a.m. on the 7th, and then 4 hours later the operations commenced on Gavatu. I mentioned earlier Savo Island. Savo Island, as it turns out, is the 2nd largest naval disaster in history after Pearl Harbor for the United States. And so what had happened, as I mentioned earlier, our U.S. Navy scored perhaps the most magnificent victory in the history of the U.S. Navy. It's almost like our Trafalgar in some ways at Midway, when those 6 carriers were sunk through a combination of timing and weather and all that sort of thing. But even though we really weakened the Japanese Navy, their cruisers and their destroyers and their heavy attack weapons were still available, and they were going to be coming in here through this nightly Pineapple Express coming down the sleeve, which I'll talk about in a second. And they basically hit our several of our ships in a surprise attack on the night of August 9th and sent them all to the bottom. And it turned out to be a naval disaster. We lost over 1,000 men. The numbers are actually in the book. But because of this, the Navy made a decision to pull those carriers out. We didn't want to run the risk of that. And so the Marines were basically left without a lot of protection for a while. There's another map here of what happened at Savo Island with these ships. Astoria, the Quincy, the Vincennes, all those went down. A number of the ships showing went down, and these were the cruisers and destroyers that were out there to the northwest that were supposed to be guarding the approach and protecting the Marines as they came in first to Tulagi and then to Guadalcanal.
So during this time, General Vandegrift was alerted back on Guadalcanal that the Navy were getting tense and they wanted to pull out earlier than they had planned to. And the Navy had all the supplies for the Marines, the food, the ammunition, all the stuff that they were going to unload and use on Guadalcanal and Tulagi. So Vandegrift left Guadalcanal in the evening to, if you were looking at a map, you'd see Guadalcanal and then Tulagi and the Florida Island, there's about 20 miles distance. So he's going from Guadalcanal to go find General Rupertus to tell them the Navy's pulling out, you need to unload whatever you can. Well, Vandegrift kind of gets a little lost, and he eventually gets to find Rupertus, and Rupertus was on the beach, and so he went out and they met on the USS Neville, and Vandegrift said, the Navy's pulling out, you need to alert your Marines to unload as much as you can as possible. And while Vandegrift was coming over, they witnessed, before he even saw Rupertus, the Battle of Savo Island had started. And so it was obviously a very tense time. But Rupertus, came right back, and they unloaded as much as the supplies they could, and then the Navy did leave. And I don't know if in the Pacific it really is. It was really scary for the Marines, because here they are in the Pacific without enough food, without enough water. And my Aunt Jo, whose husband was also in the Pacific, always used to say, "Oh, those poor Marines were all alone." And I never knew what she meant until I actually studied this and learned from different diaries of what happened. And I think in the book we've done a great job to honor the ships that went down and the lives that were lost. I mean, it was really just devastating. But the Marines survived, as they tend to do, and the Japanese had left when the Marines landed on Guadalcanal. The Japanese had taken off and left food on the table. They, went more inland, and they left food on the table. They left communication equipment. So the Marines on Guadalcanal had some benefits over there, but it was a really hairy time.
Yeah, and there were actually Battle of Savo Island Part 1 and Part 2. And what Amy mentioned, if you look into this map, Vandegrift was now off of Lunga Point, and his ships were there. His transport group was larger than, you can see there were twice as many ships on the Guadalcanal transport group. And so he goes in a boat across this, Sea Lark Channel. They're looking for General Rupertus, who is on board USS Haywood. They finally find him, and they're seeing these explosions off to the west, and these explosions are the first attack on these cruisers, and several of the cruisers going down. They can see, off to the side. It's certainly a terrifying thing. The Japanese did come back, and by that time, Admiral Scott had taken command of the U.S. naval forces and executed a strategy to block and to intercept the Japanese and turn them back. But even after that, when you look at the movie The Pacific, you see, when we see the story of the great John Basilone and the Americans, the Marines are being hit almost every night from these ships coming down the sleeve from Noumea and from New Britain, as we'll see in a moment. But it was a very, very hairy time. It's a photograph of General Rupertus on with his staff at Tulagi, and General Rupertus is on the middle row there, sitting kind of by himself. And we have a couple of headlines there. The Sunday Star in Washington, D.C. announces Navy launches an offensive against the Solomons. We did not know where. It was all sort of speculative. We didn't know it was Guadalcanal or somewhere else, but they did a pretty good job of getting the story kind of right. What I'm showing here is Lunga Point. I know you're very familiar with all this, Craig, where the 1st Marines were setting up and trying to establish a perimeter around the airfield the Japanese had started to build, because that was really the big grand prize of Guadalcanal. This is depicting the situation on August 12th. Now remember, August 7th was D-Day at Tulagi. By the 9th, we'd scored our first victory on the ground. General Rupertus and his Marines had taken Tulagi, which fell the 8th, and then the next day, the following day, Guavatu and Tamambogo fell. But we had a lot of work to do now that we secured those two places to get moving on Guadalcanal. What we're seeing here is the Solomon Islands, and you can see this is a more modern map, but we see where Guadalcanal is located. And the Japanese were coming down the sleeve, kind of like the middle of this whole section of islands. I'm going to pull away for a little larger map here. They were coming out of Rabaul, which is on the island of New Britain. And General Rupertus would later become involved in fighting there in New Britain. And I'll talk about that in a second. But where this red map is located is basically the route that the Japanese Navy would come down almost nightly to hit Marines in the Solomon Islands, especially on Guadalcanal. We're seeing here, again, the juxtapositions of Savo, Tulagi, Florida Island, and Guadalcanal, the entire area that had to be controlled. And interestingly, General Vandegrift, General Rupertus, we see here would go back and forth between Tulagi and Guadalcanal across this Sea Lark Channel, which later became known as Iron Bottom Sound, on one of these Navy yard patrol boats. I mean, it was a dangerous thing just to cross that place. And this is taken on the Tulagi side. Is that right, Amy? Your grandfather?
Yeah, and he's jumping out of, I believe that's an old tuna boat.
Right.
Yeah, he really liked those, and those he really thought that the YP boats, he really appreciated their work, and he always would look at when they would go from these boats. They were former tuna boats that would go from Tulagi to Guadalcanal, bringing Marines, supplies back and forth, and they really put themselves at great risk.
They did.
So he's jumping out of one.
Well, you're taking your life in your hands every time you're crossing that Sea Lark Channel, because the naval danger the Japanese continue to bring in. They're still continuing to load troops onto Guadalcanal as they're doing this as well. And here we see Savo Island becomes known as Iron Bottom Sound. That really traced back to the first battle of Savo Island, when we lost so many ships there. And again, this is showing the defensive perimeter that we kind of built with our Marines around that Lunga Point area as the Japanese continued to sort of build up really on both perimeters on the east and the west. Again, another photo showing after the Battle of Edson Ridge, which I contend is the second major battle on Guadalcanal. There were a number of skirmishes, but 3 big battles, of which General Rupertus commanded the final one. And I'll talk about that in a second. The Battle of Tenaroo, some call it Alligator Creek, Battle of Edson's Ridge, and then the Battle of Henderson Field with the final battle, which we'll talk about in a second, on Guadalcanal. We're showing some pictures here snapped off of Alligator Creek, or the Battle of Tenaroo. The Japanese attempted a major offensive, again, to come into the perimeter and to break the perimeter that the Marines had set around Lunga Point. This is a map showing the battle for Henderson Field, and of course you know that better than me, Craig, but they try to basically a battering ram type of maneuver to try to push up into the weak side of the Marines' defensive perimeter. And this is when John Basilone basically showed his great heroics. But here's the rest of the story that a lot of folks don't know, and we do supplement and correct the historical record. General Vandegrift had left Guadalcanal and had gone to New Caledonia for meetings with Admiral King. He left General Rupertus in command during the final battle from the 24th to the 26th. And Rupertus actually wound up commanding the final battle and the largest battle there at Guadalcanal. There were other skirmishes afterwards, but this basically, I would contend, broke the backs of the Japanese as a force to be contended with on the ground. So we're taking care of that. It's a photograph of Admiral Nimitz awarding the General Navy Cross, August 1st, 1942, for his command at Tulagi. Now, here's an interesting story. The 1st Marines went to Australia for respite and to recover and to basically to battle, the dengue fever and malaria. A lot of them had, more than half the division had malaria. Well, during that time, General Rupertus was assigned to be the escort officer for a period of time for Eleanor Roosevelt, who came to Australia representing the Red Cross. And when Eleanor Roosevelt came to Australia, it drove all the American and Allied commanders bananas, because 1, you got to impress the First Lady of the United States, and then 2, you got security issues. But the general was also not just a fierce warrior, but a diplomat. And here we see a picture of the First Lady and the general in Australia. After the visit, and I think Amy has documented this very well, First Lady wrote the general a letter, a handwritten letter thanking him for escorting him. And we have that and discussed that in the book. And this is a letter from the 1st Army Corps, September 16th, 1943, Brigadier General Byers writing on behalf of General Admiral Nimitz, General MacArthur, thanking General Rupertus for so well serving the First Lady. I want to talk about a little bit the movement of the Pacific War after the Marines were done at Australia. In Australia, Vandegrift was called away, and now at this point, Rupertus is named as the sole commander of the 1st Marine Division. And so, as you know, Craig, the American forces were involved in this island hopping campaign, eventually to strangulate Japan and maybe even to invade. And the 1st Marines fought so valiantly that this is sort of unknown as well, but there was a political tug of war going on between Nimitz and MacArthur over who was going to command it. Yeah.
I want to hear this.
So you know that never has been a personality maybe in the U.S. military like Douglas MacArthur. At any rate, MacArthur wanted the Marines under his command, and Roosevelt had a unique way of arbitrating these things, and so MacArthur got his wish, and so the Marines were initially transferred to General MacArthur's command in New Britain. Here we have New Britain, and remember a moment ago we showed that map of Noumea, which is at the northeastern corner of New Britain, which is where the Japanese Navy had consolidated. Admiral Yamamoto had gone there. He was later shot down by the U.S. Army Air Force flying a reconnaissance mission from there. But MacArthur wanted to continue strangling and tightening the Japanese. So, we'd gone into Bougainville.
Do you speak Japanese?
Woke up. They're still alive.
Yeah, no shit.
We'd taken those islands. MacArthur wanted to put a stranglehold around them by moving into New Britain on the other side. So Cape Gloucester is located at the opposite end of New Britain from Noumea. So it was, you'll appreciate this as a Canadian. I suppose you're Canadian, Craig. You're in Montreal, but I don't want to assume anything. But you.
Ah ouais, Kevin, si continue comme ça, c'est demain qu'on est.
You Canadians and your British brothers and sisters appreciate Boxing Day, and so do I. So it was Boxing Day 1943 that the 1st Marine Division under General Rupertus commences operations against Cape Gloucester. Here's a better map of New Britain. You can see it's off of the New Guinea coast, and you can see Rabaul, where the Japanese were located. So military operations were started that day under some very rough water. Remarkable photograph of the landing on New Britain. As you can see, U.S. Marines storming through very rough waters. A photograph here of General Rupertus raising the American flag once they had established a beachhead. New Britain is one of those things, when you see, if you've seen the Pacific, as they call it a green monster. So I mean, the rain, the monsoons, and the rainy season were almost as much of a challenge like they were sometimes in Guadalcanal as were the Japanese. But some remarkable photographs of New Britain. And for
can you back up to that, John?
Yeah, go right ahead. You want last photo, Amy? Did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, go right ahead.
So here they had just captured the airport, and they're actually praying for the lives that were lost. So for the listeners who we're looking at it, it's a pretty famous picture of on Cape Gloucester. There's a plane. I don't know if that's a Japanese plane, Zero, but it's on the ground, blown up. But the Marines are all, their heads are bowed underneath the American flag, and they're actually praying. There's a chaplain there, and for the lives that were lost taking Cape Gloucester and getting the airport. So it's pretty powerful.
Just as remarkable photography. This map is showing where the Marines came in. They came in on 2 beaches, and the Japanese, of course, were entrenched, and so they got into a firefight there. From Suicide Creek to Hill 660, which is where the Japanese were entrenched. And it was literally like a jungle-infested hill that our Marines have to go up the side of, and it was just really rough going. When Cape Gloucester fell, the Marines received a congratulatory letter via radio from President Roosevelt, and this is a photograph of General Rupertus reading that letter to the troops. So the president, the entire U.S. military, and the Allies were very much aware of what was going on. A little closer view of that is a very moving photograph. After this is an interesting photo because after New Britain, the Marines again needed rest, some rest and relaxation. Remember, after Solomon Islands or after Guadalcanal, they got to go to, Australia. Everybody loves Australia, unless you're locked down with COVID there now. But everybody loves Australia. But in this case, it wasn't to be. So they go to a place called Pavuvu, which is a jungle-infested place and wasn't so great for the morale. But General Rupertus heard that Bob Hope was nearby at another island. What was the other island? Do you remember, Amy?
Danica.
Okay, and so the general sends for Bob Hope. Bob Hope comes over and entertains the troops on Pavuvu, and here's a shot that was taken of that with the general sitting beside Bob Hope, who was great. Probably a little before your time, Bob Hope, Craig, but I remember when Bob Hope was even in Vietnam, he was a great guy, always entertained the troops. It's an overall map of the sweep of, again, the island hopping campaign, because after New Britain, the next step was Peleliu. And Peleliu, of course, was a controversial strategic decision.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, Season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private Internet Access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private Internet Access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private Internet Access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use Private Internet Access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for Private Internet Access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/The Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
An overall map of the sweep of, again, the island hopping campaign, because after New Britain, the next step was Peleliu. And Peleliu, of course, was a controversial strategic decision. There was a lot of, back and forth on whether to go there or not. General MacArthur, by this time, the 1st Marine Division has now been given back to Nimitz, okay? So MacArthur has lost control of it. However, MacArthur, sort of left the Philippines in, for him in disgrace, but he promised, I shall return. And he was.
I landed on your soil. I said to the people of the Philippines whence I came, I shall return. Tonight, I repeat those words. I shall return.
Hoping to do that. If you look at where Peleliu is located, near Mindanao, it's several hundred miles off the southeastern Philippine coast. So MacArthur initially felt that securing Peleliu would give him a better chance of going into the Philippines, because the Japanese were heavily entrenched there. The U.S. Navy, Admirals King, Admirals Nimitz, were pushing more toward an argument of, hitting Japan directly, as I recall. MacArthur wanted, he wanted to have it, he wanted to have it his way, and Roosevelt initially, he took the 1st Marine Division back from MacArthur, but let him, so they did go into Peleliu. And the thing about Peleliu, it turned out to be one of the bloodiest, battles. And what had happened, a lot of people don't realize, is the Japanese essentially changed their battle tactics. We saw, again, if you go back, and I'm sure a number of your viewers and listeners, saw the docudrama of the Pacific, and I saw it, and partly I wanted to see it because we were working on this book at the time. I wanted to see how it was portrayed there. But, the General Vandergrist's 1st Marine Division weighed onto the shores of Guadalcanal, and the Japanese strategy has been kind of let them come in, and then we attack, okay? So you draw them in and attack. At Peleliu, they totally reversed that.
Yeah, Peleliu is a fascinating, and as I was doing this research, I found the plan for the Japanese plan for building and staffing the whole underground tunnels. I found it was from the Army, U.S. Army's Demobilization Bureau, and they had translated these documents. And Unfortunately, because word count, I couldn't put it in the whole book. We couldn't put it in the book, but it talks about the whole engineering plan for basically killing as many American Marines and our American military as possible. And between the connected tunnels and where they could hide out. I mean, we had been bombing them since March. Some people say that we only were bombing them bombing Peleliu for 3 days, but we had been bombing them since March. So you think we would have made some progress. And so I think there was a lot of belief that the naval bombing had.
Well, they thought that they had taken out most of the Japanese.
Yeah.
They had not even touched them, basically.
And, you know, in our intelligence, you know, there was an intelligence failure for whatever reason. And I think it might be argued, and maybe you'll agree with this or not, Craig, but the Peleliu was the beginning, basically, of a shift in the Japanese warfighting strategy on these islands. I mean, you see it replicated at Iwo Jima.
Okinawa was a big one after that.
Exactly. So this was the beginning of a new strategy we had not seen. In this photograph, General Rupertus is standing here. There are 4 crosses, and he is standing just above the 3rd cross to the right, and just to the right of the screen, to his left, is Chesty Puller, who of course was involved in the initial. Chesty was on the ground on D-Day at Peleliu, and that was really something. Some other photographs here, and Amy, feel free to jump in, taken on Peleliu.
So I think the best. I'm sure your listeners, or many of them, have read With the Old Breed by Eugene Pledge. That is a great book on the boots on the ground and the horror they experienced throughout the Pacific, particularly Peleliu. The fact that they prevailed is just awe-inspiring, despite everything they went through. But here's a picture of our grandfather checking in on the Marines. So this is Peleliu Island. There's a Jeep, and there are a bunch of wounded Marines on it. Our grandfather's talking to them and on the beach and seeing how they're doing. You'll see in some pictures that he had injured himself. He was getting better here, but he had been getting back in the training for Pavuvu, he had been getting into a boat, and he grabbed a handle, a transport boat. He'd been going between islands, and he grabbed a handle, and the canvas handle had disintegrated and split, and he fell down on some coral, and he hurt his ankle. And so that's why it's wrapped with a picture of Bob Hope, and that's why he has a cane here. It's a pretty powerful picture.
And he remained in command, I think, until November. This was a joint operation with the Army, as you know, Craig, and the Army came in and began to relieve the Marines after several weeks.